The point is, God wasn't withholding from any of these women in their season of waiting. They were simply a part of a bigger story He was still in the process of writing. If Scripture is any indication, the very areas of our lives we feel forgotten by God in are the very parts of our story He is going to use most significantly in His. Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today's video, I want to share some encouragement with you if you feel forgotten by God. I think there's so many reasons you could feel forgotten by God. Maybe you've been praying for something for a really long time and feel like all you're getting is radio silence. Maybe you feel like everyone around you is getting the thing that you long for and that God is working in everybody else's life and moving in everyone else's life but yours, and you feel overlooked, less than, and forgotten. And that is not a fun thing to feel. But here's what you need to know. There may be times or even really long seasons where you feel forgotten by God, but the truth is you never are. In this video, I'm going to share a powerful nugget that I pray will be such an encouragement to you, that was such a powerful encouragement to me in the season where I felt most forgotten by God. I'm also going to share a verse that I had heard before, but that recently made so much more sense to me that I pray will be an encouragement to you as well. So before we get into it, if you haven't already, please be sure to give this video a thumbs up and then also hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. I love creating videos that help you know God more through His Word and that encourage you in your walk with Him. So let's get into it. So have you ever wondered why genealogies are in the Bible? You know, like those long lists where it says this person had this person and this person had this person. One of my favorite books in the Bible is Genesis, and the book of Genesis starts by telling the creation story, but then when you get to Genesis chapter 5, you run face first into a genealogy, and each genealogy in the Bible looks a little bit different, but the genealogy in Genesis 5 goes a little something like this. It says so-and-so lived so many years and then fathered so-and-so and then continued on living so many years. Then when his son had lived so many years, he fathered so-and-so and then continued on living so many years, and so on and so forth. And so one time when I was reading through the book of Genesis and came across this genealogy, I realized that everyone was around the same age when they started having kids. Relatively speaking, keeping in mind that people in those days lived hundreds of years. But one guy was 130 when he started having kids, another was 105, one was 90, one was 70, one was 65, one was 162, another was 187. So they're all roughly around the same age until you get to Noah. Most of us know the story of the flood and Noah's Ark, but when you get to Noah, Noah is first referenced in this genealogy in Genesis 5:32. And here we find out that when Noah first started having kids, his age looked a little different. He was actually 500 years old. And when I realized this, it made me wonder, was it hard for Noah? Was it hard for him to watch everyone around him receive the thing that I'm sure he longed for? And you know, maybe it wasn't so hard for Noah when he was around 100 years old, around, you know, the relative age where people in his day were starting to have kids. But what about when he hit 210 years old, or 355 years old, or 499 years old? Was it hard for him then? But then the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Noah actually is not the anomaly. Meaning, almost all of the key players in God's story that unfolds throughout Scripture have this commonality where they seem to have life not happen on the same timeline as everyone around them. For example, we have the three patriarchs. We have Sarah, Rebecca, and Rachel. And something that all three of these women have in common is that for years they dealt with barrenness. We have Sarah, who literally laughed at the thought of having a baby, and she offered up her maidservant instead to conceive a baby with her husband because the thought that she would be able to have a baby in her old age seemed laughable to her. We have Rebecca, whose husband prayed that she might conceive a child because she hadn't been able to. And we have Rachel, who watched as her sister Leah popped out baby after baby after baby when she was begging God to give her one of her own. And all these stories, by the way, are found in the book of Genesis if you want to read them more. And I want to just pause and acknowledge that I think it can be really easy for us to sort of brush over Bible stories because we forget that they took a whole lot longer to live through than they take for us to read through. Since we know how the story ends, it's easy for us to just skip on ahead, but if we just sit here in this place in the story for a little bit, we can recognize how painful that would have felt. In today's day and age, marriage and kids are big desires for many, but in those days, not only were those things desires, but they were also means of provision for your family line. So for these women to not have those things, to not have their own children, they would have felt less than, overlooked, and forgotten by God. They would have felt like God had good things for other people, but not for them. Now, if you guys know my story, you know that I got married at 29, and while that is by no means old, having grown up in the church and in Christian culture where most of my friends were getting married at like 21, 23, somewhere in that range, being still single, yet watching most of my friends get married and start to have kids, this is how I felt a lot of the time. And if singleness is the area where you feel forgotten by God, I do have an entire devotional that I wrote speaking encouragement into that I'll have linked down below. It's my Still Single devotional. But in those times where I felt forgotten by God, knowing how the stories of these women in the Bible, knowing how their stories ended, brought me a lot of encouragement. Because Rachel, she eventually did have a baby, and the baby that she waited all those years for was Joseph. And if you know Joseph's story, you know that he was a man who God used to save an entire nation. Sarah and Rebecca also eventually had babies, and the babies that they waited all those years and years and years for were Isaac and Jacob, two of the patriarchs through whom eventually came the line of Jesus, who came to save the entire world. And this same pattern persists with the other quote-unquote forgotten women in the Bible. There's Hannah in the Old Testament who waited years and years and years for a baby and longed so deeply for that, all the while watching her sister Peninnah, which hopefully I'm saying that right, watching her sister Peninnah have baby after baby and even mock Hannah because she didn't have any. Well, the baby that Hannah waited all those years for was Samuel, who was one of the greatest prophets in the pages of scripture. There's Elizabeth in the New Testament who also waited years and years and years for a baby, and the baby she finally had in her old age was John the Baptist. The point is, God wasn't withholding from any of these women in their season of waiting. They were simply a part of a bigger story He was still in the process of writing. You see, there was an exact time in history that Rachel's baby Joseph needed to come into the world in order to fulfill the purposes that God had for him. There was an exact time in history that Hannah's baby Samuel needed to come into the world to fulfill the purposes that God had for him. Same for Sarah, same for Rebecca, and same for Elizabeth. And the same is true for you and me. There is an exact time in history that the events in your life need to unfold in order for you to fulfill the purposes that God has for you. I don't know what area of your life you feel forgotten in, but I do know that God hasn't forgotten you, even when your circumstances seem to say that He has. And this is what God says to you. This is the verse I referenced at the beginning of the video, and this is God speaking. It's Isaiah 49:15, and here's what He says to you. He says, "Never can a mother forget her nursing child. Can she feel no love for the child she has borne? But even if that were possible, I would not forget you. See, I have written your name on the palms of my hands." So now that I am a mom who is breastfeeding, who is a nursing mother, this verse resonates with me in an entirely new way. As a nursing mom, literally all of my thoughts are ordered around my baby. When did he last eat? When do I need to feed him next? Did he eat enough? Not only that, but I also eat certain things and avoid eating other things to make sure that I have milk that is good and nutritious for him. Quite literally, my entire schedule is structured around giving my little baby what he needs. The verse also says, "Can a mother feel no love for the child she has borne?" And after carrying Judah for 9 months and going through a 42-hour labor to bring him into this world, the thought that I could ever forget him or ever not do anything in my power to care for him and to love him and to give him everything that he needs. The thought that that could ever be possible is literally insane. And here, this is the analogy that God himself uses to express to us his love and care and concern for us. Whether or not you're a mom, we can all understand that a mother has great love for her child, that she literally could not forget her child. And here God says to us, even if it were possible for a mother to forget her nursing child, he says, I would not forget you. The cool thing about the women in these genealogies is that the very same ones who stood out because they were waiting when everyone around them was progressing are the very ones whose eventual answers to their prayers and answers to their waiting and their longing stood out because they played an integral role in God's story. If scripture is any indication, the very areas of our lives we feel forgotten by God in are the very parts of our story he is going to use most significantly in his. I would love to hear from you down in the comments. Is there an area of your life you feel forgotten in that you would love to have lifted up in prayer? Comment that down below, and I'm also going to be sharing in a pinned comment the most encouraging quote I've ever heard when it comes to this topic. I pray that this video is an encouragement to you, that it points you to the character of God, that you are reminded that God quite literally cannot forget you. He has not forgotten you, and he is still working out his story in your life. If you found this video helpful or encouraging, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. Bye.